Mrs. Boynton.
Here.
Mrs. Macklin.
Here.
Mr. Akins.
Here.
Mrs. Turner Birch.
Present.
Mrs. Carter. Here.
Thank you. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 2.01 is acknowledgement of goals. You can read those at your leisure. And item number 3.01 is approval of our written plan for ODEW. And at this time, Mrs. Armstrong will do your finance presentation. Thank you.
So the purpose of today's meeting, again, in response to the request from the Department of Education, is for the Bedford City School District to come up with a written plan to submit to DEW for approval. Over the last couple of months, I've been working with Dr. Johnson and the administrative leadership team to identify additional budget reductions. As we spoke about at our February budget reduction meeting, as well as at the 5-year forecast, we know that there were additional items that needed to be reviewed. And even here with this plan, we know that there's more work to be done when we look at fiscal year 27. You may do it up here. No, yes, I'll do it up here.
Okay.
It was too many pages.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Or you're all over.
All right, I'm gonna try to blow it up for you. My computer wasn't working. Unfortunately, the spreadsheet that DEW gives us, we can't manipulate it at all. We can't add lines or zoom in, so
Gotcha.
that's why I was hoping you could at least pull it up on your computer, but I'll try to zoom in on here for you.
Thank you.
As I was saying, even with this written plan, there's still more work that needs to be done. As we kind of go through it, you'll see that all the work we've done to date gets rid of our negative cash balance in fiscal year 2026, but 2027 will still have a negative cash balance. And then also, as we continue to look through it, you'll see that our deficit spending, which is the ultimate goal, is to fix the deficit spending. It still needs some work there, but this is due to the state by the 31st. Yep. So I'll keep going. So some of the, I'll pull up the slide. The first part of the state's program is they wanted us to close the fiscal year. So we had to close the fiscal year, and then we had to true up our actual numbers to what we projected for our May forecast for last fiscal year, 2024. So that's the first step, and then we have to look at those actuals and make a decision on how we want to carry those forward into the next 4 years of the 5-year forecast. So within those assumptions, so this slide right here is the actual change, and I'm going to try to zoom in because it's really small. So again, this fiscal year 24 column, the changes here are all about truing up the actuals for this year. Some of the biggest swings came in our transfer and advances, which we kind of anticipated because we had multiple years to clean up there, as well as our salaries and benefits actually came in favorable for this school year. And then our contracted services came in high, and our supplies came in, no, our contracted services came in a little bit lower than we had projected. And then our supplies came in a little bit higher than we projected. And those were the big movers in our actuals for this year. Again, with the highest being our transfers and advances. So as you look at this, if you look across the rest of the years, I'm going to go down to the transfer and adjustment. So this 4.5 million almost every year adjustment that we made, again, also adjusts itself on the revenue side. in the advances in and out. So it looks like a huge number, but it's a in and out. We talk about how you see that on both sides of the equation. The other adjustment that we made in our assumptions to the May forecast was the change in the restricted and unrestricted federal funds. In the original forecast, we had an adjustment to the base cost at 4%, and then we also had built in enrollment numbers from what we knew in May. So we updated them to actually project what we know the numbers were as of our July 2nd payment, so it was a little bit more current. And then we also went a little bit more conservative about the base being changed, so that's controlled by the state. They set the base, you know how they have to recalculate the base. So we went a little bit more conservative and dropped that to 2%. So that way, if that does not occur, we're not overestimating our revenue. However, we did keep in the phase in. We're hoping that the state continues to phase in. Again, that's something we can't control, but we did keep in the phase in. And just as a caveat to the whole presentation, we're only being funded at 66% of what the state says schools need based on the funding formula. So we're only at 66%. So we're assuming that they're going to continue to phase in the formula. So that is what you're seeing across these lines up top. It's hard to see what, let me see if I can get over there. So that's your unrestricted grant and funds, our change in assumptions there. The only other thing as far as the funding, or as the 5-year forecast went that we changed, was the purchase services. Again, those came in high. We did adjust, even though we know that internally we are trying to fix that issue. We did adjust it to somewhat match what the final numbers for the year ended, just to be safe. So again, that's a more conservative number, but we did carry it through the entire forecast since there was such a huge swing. Throughout the year, we continued to adjust that number. But besides that, nothing else really we didn't feel was necessary to carry through the forecast or make any adjustments to our 5-year forecast. So then after we complete that, the state has us complete an analysis and justify every reason for why every number was not what we projected in May. So then the next step was to then work with the school board and really define every single reduction, and we have to submit it to them by the month. So that's what the next several pages of the sheet kind of does, and it goes by years. And I don't want to go through here screen by screen. Do you want to see it that way? Or is it okay if I talk about it as a lump of what the reduction was? I can go maybe through one for you so you can understand what the sheet is telling you. Okay. So, so these first 3 through So 3 through, I went too far. 11 are all of those change in assumptions that we just talked about, but it's in their format. So again, those are those in the system. And so how I said by month, so one of the change in assumptions that we did make that I didn't talk about was when we completed the 5-year forecast, the BEA was still negotiating their contract. We had it in the forecast at 2.75, and since it came in at 2, I had to adjust the forecast for that. So I had to go in here and put every month, how much was it in wages and benefits that we saved in our forecast. So that's one where you'll see it go through the entire program, and they do it by year. So each one is a different year. So that's kind of what this sheet does. So everything that I'm going to talk to you about is on this sheet broken down by the month. Okay, so I'm going to move away from the sheet because the sheet is very confusing. If you need me to go back and explain one, just let me know, Mrs. Turner-Birch. All right, so in regards to our actual expenditure reductions, and Dr. Johnson, I'll let you jump in at any point as we go through these. The first expenditure reduction was the elimination of 21 internal substitute teachers. That was in conjunction with us identifying that over the last 2 years, it was not producing the results that the district was looking for. So we were returned to our outsourcing it through the ESC That's gonna save the district over fiscal year 25 and 28, $3.3 million. The second expenditure reduction was the non-union staff. Those on the administrative leadership development, the administrative B, and the specialist contract book will not receive a percentage increase. They will only receive a step increase, and they will instead receive some non-monetary compensations to offset that, such as additional floating holidays, and that's going to save the district almost $500,000. One in just the current year, and then plus compounding when you don't carry that increase for multiple years. Oh yeah, that's what I had already.
Sorry, because I know they're gonna be looking.
Yep. I'm sorry. All right, there we go. So that is number 2. The third reduction is the district went through the athletic supplementals with the athletic director and some of members of the executive leadership team. And they looked and compared our number of coaches or assistant coaches or the different things that we provided to our staff and students, and we reduced those to be more in line with similar district standards, and also just looked for opportunities to save money. And we identified $615,000 there over the next 3 years that in savings. Budget reduction number 4. Okay, go ahead.
As it pertains to the supplemental, so is that what, a reduction in what those stipends looked like before, or?
No, so some of, yeah, that's within the union contract. Some of them chose to split, I believe, like the assistant coaching job. So instead of each of them being an assistant coach, they split it, or we just reduced the number. And we had to go through and make sure that we kept it, equal between the girls and the boys sports based on enrollment. So we went through each sport. We looked at, the standard number of kids that we have seen in the program over the last couple of years, and decided what we really needed for our district in regards to coaches, assistant coaches. I mean, we even looked at the things that we offered coaches. I think we looked at shirts. They didn't need to have those every year. We talked about several things that we were offering as perks that we just can't afford to do anymore going forward. So the next was the special education department. Through attrition and elimination of contracts, we will hire several of the positions, such as the parapros, the occupational therapist, the speech therapist internally. So the total savings by eliminating contracts or getting rid of positions not needed is going to save the district $1.5 million. I know to date Miriam has filled several of those positions. I know there's some that she's in the final stages, but she has filled several of the positions that she was trying to move from contract to internal services, as well as the BEAR program is picking up some of the salaries in some of the kids that traditionally we would have outsourced.
And just so we could just, because I want to make sure this is very, very clear, we are not cutting special education services. But I feel what you've been able to do, Tabby, as well as what Mrs. Armstrong, is really go through our expenditures to ensure that we're being fiscally responsible and bringing our babies back home, but also getting ahead of the game on our hiring practices to hire individuals internally rather than through agencies. Because even though the employees at agencies are not making a lot of money, the agencies are making a lot of money.
So my question in that is, with the whole Medicaid billing, how does that affect that? Because I thought that was being done because we had contracted services with.
That's just
the
completely,
agencies.
yeah, that's completely separate.
Okay.
Because some children qualify for that based on their disability in the services, that it was more of a reimbursement
Mhm.
to the general fund, to my
Yeah.
understanding.
And we would still get paid for those students,
Yeah.
because just because our staff member, as long as they have the correct certification, which typically they do, I think Jatina spoke a little bit about that. It's all about, we still would code them and still receive our Medicaid reimbursement for those students.
Okay.
We're just in-housing it and saving on our salaries and benefits,
Yeah.
lines.
And I would say even things like that as a district, has been very imperative with, under the leadership that we have, that they're ensuring that we're actually billing. I know it takes time, but it also goes to the accountability of individuals overseeing and ensuring that that billing practice is being processed. Because I know a lot of times it might take time, but that is bringing the funds back to the district, and that does not always happen.
Gotcha. All right. Any more questions on that one?
No, the other one would be, is this eliminated as far as, or rather should I say, there's like building behavioral specialists, building behavior, so every building would have one, or is this people that are gonna float still across buildings?
For the behavioral specialist?
Like, I'm just throwing one out in particular, like, but like the school psychologist, or there's like building psychologists, or versus grade levels, how is that?
It doesn't change how many we have, it just changes how we're hiring, because we weren't able to fill those positions with, by union employees. We just didn't have candidates. Like every district, there's like a shortage of your OTs, PTs, speech pathologists, school psychologists. So after COVID, it was very difficult to fill those, so we had to go through agencies. When contractual, we always have to post internally first. And then if you can't find someone, we can contract out. What we've done is we reposted internally first, and we're now able to get union employees. So that's what this means. We're gonna save money because we're getting union employees.
And I do wanna mention that some schools, the psychologist has to go from building to building. They have certain days they're in one building. It depends on the number of students that they're serving, so. I know that may happen, but may not be happening here, but I do know that.
I think they currently do that.
Yeah,
They
it depends
currently do
on the
that.
grade band.
Right.
Yeah, that's what
That some
Mhm.
do, but even, with them traveling, it still was a lot of money because of the agency.
And we also reimburse their travel when they go from building to building too.
All right, so I'll move on. So the next one is the district technology department reviewed their current supplies and their contracted services, and taking into consideration the new schools coming, they adjusted things such as their replacement cycles, and they consolidated some of their services, bringing back some services internally that they could handle, as well as just looking at our true need. Some of the contracts we had signed up for, but we weren't using them to the best of their ability, so it was cheaper for us to just pay on an as needed instead of having a overarching contract. So through that, we identified in technology about $282,000 over the next 3 years in cost savings. So then also, item 6, Dr. Johnson, you guys should all be aware of this one, at the April 4th board meeting, took that reduction in her base salary, which saved the district $42,000 over fiscal year 26 and 20 through fiscal year 26 and 28. Through the resignations that were turned in at the end of the school year, Dr. Johnson and the leadership team with the schools went through and looked at the class schedules and the enrollment projections, and looked and identified 15, and that's also a very conservative number, certificated FTE positions that through attrition in accordance to their union contract, we were able to eliminate 15 positions. And I don't know if Dr. Johnson wants to speak a little bit more on what went into identifying those teachers, but that's going to save the district $5.3 million over fiscal years 25 through 28.
Basically, it's just kind of our process that we've been doing for the past several years, just sitting down with our principals, looking at all of our class sizes. Again, through COVID, we were were able to, there were various reasons as to why or how we could utilize those COVID funds. One of the reasons was, lowering those class sizes, retention, things of that nature. So our class sizes were a lot lower. For example, we were able to offer some things that maybe we would not have been able to offer, but we can no longer afford to have class sizes of 8, 10, 15 at the secondary level, things of that nature. Just being a little bit more fiscally responsible, but I will say that we still have lower class sizes. That we believe between the 25 per student range at our secondary level, but we will continue to watch that based upon enrollment. So we never really adjusted after COVID, even though our enrollment went down. We did not make those cuts. So through attrition, for example, as maybe some people might have left, we might not have replaced, so we went that route. As I believe I've always stated that we would address it through attrition, and that is what we've worked with the principals to do. So I want to make sure that even though we had that RIF list, we went through that and we tried to recall. We went through the entire list. We could have recalled all those individuals and still would have gone down. So I just try to make that very, very clear to individuals that regardless of if we've had this situation in the 5-year forecast or not, it would have been irresponsible for us not to make that adjustment even though our enrollment has gone down.
So I'm glad you brought that up because as I was looking over the last couple months, I see it's over 20 resignations that we've had in the last couple months, maybe more. And I noticed a lot of them were at Heskett. So how does that affect the class changes and or staffing of individuals? Did it help it? And is that added into this? Is that what we're seeing when these last couple of years, is that in it? And then how does that affect that building? Not just that building, but overall, because I don't know if you haven't shift people, because I haven't seen like hires.
So, no, actually there have been hires on there.
We just haven't gotten an agenda. Like,
no, they've been on there. They've been on there every single board meeting, and it's so interesting because I actually had someone send me some emails talking about Heskett. It actually has been district-wide. It's not just been Heskett, but we also had at the first round was actually the high school, where you would have seen quite a ways back some resignations. I can't go too much into personnel in the public session, but that's something that I can talk about in an executive session to maybe talk about more how that works or why that worked the way it did. But whenever someone resigns and we've got a RIF list, the first thing that we do is we have to go to that RIF list to recall to do that replacement based upon their licensure. And then after that, if the individual has already got a job or they turn down that job, they have actually, I think, 4 or 5 days to accept or decline that offer. Then we can move and post. So we have looked at our master schedules at the middle school level. We continue to look at the high school level. Some people did move internally down to some other vacancies to fill some positions. But yeah, as people leave, this is that time of year where we do a stopgap to see, okay, also how many students are leaving. So we work with Darlene Reddick to see what our enrollment is like, registration is like at the high school level before we go and we fill a position.
And when it comes to that enrollment, we are on a trend of enrollment going up at this point now, right? Or is it more of a stable? Because it's saying that ODE is projecting that we're trending down, but in fact, I saw something differently and to say that we're actually trending up. So I just want to know if you can clarify that.
We gained 50 students. We gained 50 students in talking to our registration department, I believe, between like December and June. But what ODE does not reflect in our enrollment is our preschool numbers. That is not funded, to my understanding, correct, Tabby, at federally funded?
No, we get those through different grants.
Yeah, through different grants. So that's about 200 plus children. So those are not reflected, but so that would not be on their ODE website when you look at our enrollment numbers, so that definitely needs to be into account. But we gained again, that we want back. They need services, and they're more on the higher end of the services that are needed. They might need OT, PT, one-on-one nurses, and so forth.
And then just to back that up, in the forecast though, we do trend enrollment continuing to go down. We are considering it right now what we consider like the COVID bounce back. A lot of kids were pulled out of schools and we saw them coming back this year. So we're trending. We look at more than just the last current years. And we'll probably watch the next few years and continue to adjust our forecast. So in November, depending on what happens really when school starts, we might adjust that and say, okay, now we're seeing that enrollment really is jumping up. It's hard for us to decide who's gonna send their kids to the schools, but in the forecast, we definitely are still projecting a decline. We probably lowered the gap in decline, but we are still projecting a decline in enrollment.
And one of the things ODE also does not do is they do not take into account new buildings. They don't believe in doing that.
Nope.
So even though you might have some individuals that say, oh, there's not gonna be an impact, there was not an impact, you can look at the enrollment data in our surrounding districts, such as a Warrensville, that has built, especially elementary schools, those babies do come back. So that is one of the reasons why we did lean and ask of our community, how do you want to handle that? When we had our bond issue, and the community stated they did want us to, even though it might be locally funded, because preschool is not federally funded, for us to go up a little bit, because there is an expectation that children will come back.
And then the last thing I do want to add, for anyone who does go on DEW and pull down their funding assumptions, we spent a lot of time with DEW through this process, actually probably arguing their formula versus what we had. And once we finally got down into the nitty gritty, even their enrollment numbers were outdated. They were still using our beginning of the year numbers to do our 24 and 25 projections.
Yes.
So the numbers were very outdated, and we had to kind of present back to them how their data was not as up to date as ours when we were doing our projections. So I think that's important for people to
Right.
understand
Yes.
when you're looking at what DEW is putting out, and then you're looking at our numbers and maybe comparing them, because there was about $1 million difference in our unrestricted and restricted grant funding, or state funding, but we went and we justified how we came up with our number. And again, after we went back and forth, we did make that adjustment to the base cost. We said, okay, we'll be a little bit more conservative so we can kind of meet where their number is and ours, but we did really were forced to go line by line and look at what we were projecting for our 5-year forecast.
Thank you for this clarity,
Yeah.
because there is questions.
Oh, always.
And it has been shown, those who do go on to DEW's website and they're looking at the numbers and it's like, well, there's a difference here. And I knew it wasn't quite correct because he doesn't even report our classroom sizes,
No,
like the
he
ratios
doesn't.
appropriately. So I've mentioned that, but thanks for this clarity in that, because that's important.
Yeah, and I will share I guess the disappointment is, and one of the things that we continue to have meetings with, because for example, I had a meeting the other day with even our building subs. And I know people might not believe it, or it's just a recommendation. It's probably not best practice to get your factual news from social media.
Thank you.
Individuals that continue to ask questions, they put in public records requests. So they have the facts, but even though they put in public records requests for current data, they still continue to pull the data from the Department of Education, which is very disappointing. So I'm not surprised that you would continue to have the questions if individuals continue to choose to get their news and information from social media. As a public institution, they have the right to come here, look at this. The worksheet that we have, we worked hand in hand with the Department of Education. Tabby, you've been very patient, timely, efficient, answering all their questions. In addition to that, people don't understand how many auditors are in public schools, especially when we're doing well. People would think we see them less, but we see them more. But we have been audited upon audited upon audited, and you have been so patient patient with that. So that is the frustrating part, that people continue to ask the same questions, and those same individuals are the ones that have put in public records requests for your bank statements, for all your budgets, our class sizes, so they know. But they continue to go there. Even our number of administrators, they know, because they've asked us for that data. But if that's the narrative that they want to continue to create, we will continue to provide the facts.
And could we just say that the updates on ODE, it may not happen the same time we do updates.
No.
So you know what, we cannot be held accountable for their updated information, especially if we've provided that information to them. And I want to say that too, you know, it is the same people that's spreading this misinformation on social media, and it's really sad because we're face to face with folks saying this is not true, what they're saying, and come to the meetings, contact our finance department, contact our superintendent, get this information firsthand from them, and they still are spreading the misinformation. So thank you too for the clarity on this, because it is out there and people like to hear the negative and not the positive. So I've invited them to our meetings to hear the presentations in person so they can ask the question, whether during the meeting or after the meeting or at any time they want to schedule a meeting. So it's out there.
It was also just mentioned that maybe our EMIS isn't updated.
Yeah,
or
even
isn't
question
giving
the EMIS.
correct information. So I just, because you have shared, you know, where it comes and where the discrepancy is with that reporting versus our reporting.
I will say that those are things that Tabby, I think you've been in your job a little over a year. This is 2 full years for myself, and yes, we are continuously, constantly working to clean up. And so when it comes to the EMIS data part of it, those are some things. For example, when people say you got 48 or 50 some administrators, it was coded in EMIS, anyone that had that title. For example, administrative assistant. So those were coded as administrators via ODE, because based on their guidelines, there were certain codes that you had to use. Even though other districts might have the same number of people, whatever games they want to play, we did have those based upon those codes, and things of that nature. The other thing that I would say is every single 5-year forecast is on public record. So even the individuals say they don't know how we got here, you know, we've not been in this situation before. I actually forwarded to you, I think, a 5-year forecast from March 6, 2019. I forwarded the one from 2017, and it clearly states where we should have been. So I just want to thank Tabby and you as a board, and our entire leadership team for what we're attempting to do, even though we should have been in a place years ago by which we would have needed an operating levy. And I feel like that's the missing piece that people continue to forget in the narrative that they want to create of, we don't know how we got here. Well, we were told years ago where we would be in 24, 25, 26, and 27. The COVID funds assisted us just a little bit to push it off, but we knew where we would be. And so regardless of the individual, if you worked in Bedford City Schools or you lived in one of our 4 communities, you knew we would be here.
You can go back as even as early as 15 and do a data analysis between 15 and 18 and it reflected.
Yeah.
It's our fault.
No. All right.
That's what the media says.
So then the next budget reduction is the transportation department. Again, they reviewed some of our contracted services and our current routes to identify opportunities for budget reductions. That resulted in almost a $3 million savings for fiscal year 26 through 28. That was a lot of work with She also worked with NCSSA to really go through our practice and what's best practice, identifying routes, and just really went through that and brought some of what we were contracting out back in house, and so that was a big savings for us. Again, almost $3 million there.
And again, even with that, because Tabby and I, honestly, we don't have time to do interviews and have these conversations with people about transportation policies. This is not a new board policy. Our transportation supervisor is just ensuring that the policy that has been in place for years is being enforced, and that we are not taking transportation away from individuals that are supposed to be getting transportation, and that we're being more fiscally responsible, because as a result of us transporting individuals that should have never been transported, we then again have to outsource, get private transportation to transport children that should have been transported, and that is very, very, very costly to the district. So I do want to thank our entire transportation department, because I know Steph said it was a team effort to pull this together to ensure that we're being fiscally responsible.
And then we still are above the state minimum.
Oh, absolutely.
Our policy is still above the state minimum there. Okay, and then the ninth item, again, the bond issue in November passed. So we've started looking at some of the savings that comes out of that. I will say here, this is not all of the savings. We haven't looked at like the building utilities, stuff that we can't really project yet. But we did look at some of the staffing and identify where we know that there would be reductions. And so we identified non-teaching certificated, some classified, and and administrators. Classified and administrators that in school year 27, positions that would be eliminated that resulted in a little over $2 million for fiscal year 27 and 28. And again, it's important here that this is just the beginning of what the new schools will save us. And then number 10 is, again, through some restructuring of the administrative positions, there would be an elimination of 2 administrative positions through fiscal year 25 to 28 that would result in $800,000 reduction to the school budget. And those are all of the items that are currently in the written plan.
And can I ask you to do one thing for me?
Yes.
Again, I know this has been an issue in the past. Can you explain fiscal year, so as people are looking at these years, they fully understand what months they're for?
Very good.
It's
Very
not
good
calendar
question.
year, this is
No.
a completely type of fiscal
Yeah.
year, and they need to understand that, so when they're asking questions, they're accurate.
Okay. So the fiscal years run from July 1 to June 30th. So when we say fiscal year 25, that is the ending of that year. So fiscal year 25 is the one that we're in right now, July 1, 2024 through June 30th of 2025. Yep.
Thank you.
And even that, and along with that, because people might, because I asked her this
Yeah.
question, I said, because I saw number 10, and I said, oh, what about that administrator? And she reminded me
Oh, yes.
that the additional administrator, because it's not just 2, because you're going to
Right.
get called and say, they're only cutting 2 no.
Right.
This is in addition to the numbers that we already have begun to cut.
Right.
So I just wanted to clarify that when people say,
Yes.
well, why they're cutting
You
only
did ask
2
that. Right.
administrators and you're cutting 15 of this. No, this is 2
Addition.
more administrators.
Yep. So this is building upon the written plan that we took in February, and we're continuing to work. So I guess some of the important things that I think is important for everyone to still hear is, one, that there's still work to do, and we know that. Also, we're not being funded fully according to what the state says we should be funded. I think alone this year, or it might be in 25, we looked at $2 million just in unrestricted funds that we do not receive, that we should be receiving. So when we were going through with the state and kind of going back and forth, like one of the things that in my mind I kept thinking is, if we had the $2 million, we wouldn't be here. And think about, they want us to always compound forward, go back to where we haven't been funded for 3 years appropriately, and how those funds would help our district going forward. So I think that's important to understand, that we're working with a reduced budget that they think, that in their formula, they think we need this amount of funding, and and they're not giving it to us, and they're having the schools have to, fund the difference, and as well continue to mandate other things that we have to pay for. They mandate it, but they don't give us the funds for it, so we have to pull it from our general funds to continue to pay for it.
And,
So
and what is, just to be clear, what is that 2 million
it's like the, so there's a whole formula, I think I talked about it, in the, 5-year forecast that determines our funding. It looks at our valuation, it looks at our enrollment, it looks at our income. It looks at what our actual teacher and superintendent salaries are. And again, that's where when they looked at teacher salaries and superintendents and administrators' salaries, those numbers are 3 years behind. Or they just updated that to be to 22, and that's 2022. So right now we're in 2024. We know that there's been 2% increases in different things, but they're not basing our funding on that. It's based on 2 years ago. But then on top of that, when they do the complete formula, they're only paying us at 66%. I think last year we were only at 33% of what they're saying that we need funded for. So we're in a phase in, they're phasing us in to the full formula. But we have to wait for the budget to decide, which now we're gonna be due for a new budget, if they're gonna phase it in. So we are making an assumption that they will continue to phase it in. And this is the things that as the treasurer, as administration, we have to decide, what do we think the state is gonna do? So again, that's money that they're saying, according to their formula, we should be receiving, but they're not fully giving it to us. We're absorbing that difference.
And one of the things we have to also keep in mind, a lot of the mandates or things that, for example, remember that whole SRO? And we're gonna fund that SRO, we have not gotten that money. Or what they do is they say, well, Ms. Armstrong, we already gave you money for wellness. So we're not gonna give you that money that we claim security was so important. You can just take it out of the wellness money that we gave you. No. Not if they say that's where you're gonna take that money from. So they're not giving it additional funds. The other thing we talk about mandates, not only are our state tests biased, in addition to that, when we went through our budget and we're trying to tighten the belt, not only is that a mandate only to public schools, but that's costing us over $300,000. And mind you, we are required to use certain vendors for these things, and a portion of that money goes back to certain people, and it's not public schools. So that is why I say it's a larger fight for us in public schools with all these mandates. So when you talk about the science of reading and things, it's not that it's not good stuff, but we're required to use certain vendors, even if it's more expensive, and we pay for that. Nobody's giving us additional dollars. Right. It's just sad. And it's mandates that only public schools do. And the better you do as a public school, the less funding that you get.
We're gonna get hurt. Because there's money in poverty.
Yeah, I think it was.
Money in declining. It's money in that. And when you're doing better, that's where.
And those same questions was asked at OSBA. You're asking for us to do X, Y, and Z. Where's the funding for that?
Right.
There's no answers.
That was very
unfair.
I was gonna say that was very eye-opening for me, because a lot of times I see numbers at the end, or I see like as a department the numbers, and when we were going through the curriculum line by line, to hear what each of these softwares cost and to know that those weren't our choices, but we're paying for it, that was very eye-opening for me. Like there's nothing I can do about this number. That number is that number, and we can't do anything about it. We just have to budget for it. That was very eye-opening for me when we were looking at things down at the Monite level. So that is the presentation. I don't know if there are any more questions. Again, important, we still have work to do. Again, this just gets us out of 26, 27 is still needs work, and we're still running a deficit, but we need to submit this to the DEW just for see if they will approve it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tabby.
You're welcome. You learn a lot.
Yes.
It's unfair at how public schools are done, and I see the fight for getting rid of the vouchers because we're getting hurt with this, and it's
there. The ultimate, I mean, I shouldn't get on
We
the
want
stance, but
parameters.
we all know why.
Yes, I know,
You know,
Right. Yeah, you don't have to say anything.
It needs to be more parameters around it, it's really.
Yeah, it's unfair when you promise something and we don't get it. And then you wonder why students are failing or.
But the state is at a surplus.
I know.
Yes, they are.
The
Yes,
state
they
is
are.
Yes, they are.
yes, they are.
Let's remember that.
Yes.
State is at a
Yes.
surplus.
And especially in just the things, they're at a surplus, but we're having discussions about raising even the fees for future educators to become an educator so that they can get the more money. It's not coming back to the public schools.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Tabby. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Very informative. Could I have a motion, please, to approve the written plan for
Motion
submission to
to-
ODEW?
Motion to approve.
Second.
It's been moved by Mrs. Carter and second by Mrs. Turner Birch. Any more questions? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Carter,
Yes.
Mrs. Turner Birch,
Yes.
Mrs. Boynton,
Yes.
Mrs. Macklin,
Yes.
Mr. Akins.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you, board. Thank you for coming out so early this morning for this meeting. And thank you again, Tabby and Dr. Johnson. Could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting, please?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Turner Birch and second by Mr. Akins. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Turner Birch,
Yes.
Mr. Akins,
Yes.
Mrs. Boynton,
Yes.
Mrs. Macklin,
Yes.
Mrs. Carter.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. See everybody again for our regular meeting, which is Monday, August 5th at 6 o'clock. Thank you. The